All right, people, I'm Garrett. This is Making Movies, and today we're gonna get weird. I have been shooting a lot of commercials lately for social, so things for Instagram and Facebook and that kind of a thing for bigger companies, which is awesome, and I really like doing it, but it comes with some challenges. Namely, most of what I shoot professionally now is shot vertically. And for this particular commercial piece, it was a short 10-second loop, and it needed to be a seamless loop, something that could repeat over and over to engage audiences again and again, again and again, again and again over time. What I wanted to do was to rent time at a studio that had a Bolt robotic arm. So for those of you who may not be familiar, a Bolt robotic arm is kind of an arm that moves in 3D space. It's fully programmable and it can repeat motion perfectly. I've seen such cool things, whether it's slow motion food stuff or, you know, Kendrick Lamar's Humble music video. The only issue was we didn't have the budget to go use one of those arms, work with an op, be at a studio, and all of the expenses that come with that. But I still wanted the look. The challenge then became, how do you get that type of a dynamic shot without having that type of robot? To think this through, we have to think about the movement itself. How do those robots move, and then how can we replicate that movement? So the first thing that the robots can do, obviously, is that we have X axis, we have Y axis, and we have Z axis as far as movement. We can move in 3D space, left to right, front to back, up and down. And you can get some of that stuff, obviously, with sliders or cranes or jibs and that kind of thing. The other thing that it can do is that it can rotate in 3D space. So not only can it move, but now we're talking about rotating yaw. We can rotate around horizontally on our X or on our Y, and that rotation in combination with the camera moving itself is what makes these really, really dynamic shots. To pull this off, we would have to shoot on solid colored backgrounds. The reason being, in After Effects, I can then just continue that color all the way out, and that gives me a lot more space that I can then move around in post. Move being a very generous term. Because I could then create a background that would be infinite, I could then, in After Effects, use a 3D camera and then move horizontally up and down or in and out. The reason you can move in and out is you shoot in a higher resolution than the final deliverables. Final deliverables for social right now are full HD, so at most it's 1080 by 1920 vertical. The GH5S that I've been shooting the social stuff on obviously can shoot up to 4K, so I have more resolution than I need. That gives me the ability to push in without getting super pixelated, which is awesome. So I figured out how to get the side to side, the up and down, and the in and out by shooting on a solid color and by having a higher resolution than what I need. The big challenge comes in figuring out the rotation component. Without the use of something like a parabolic slider or something like that that can maintain a perfect distance around an arc, there's no real way for me to move the camera seamlessly, much less something that I can replicate, because again, we're cutting between different products that all have to look like they belong together. The solution to that comes in, instead of rotating the camera around the product, what if we just rotate the product in place in front of the camera? That then gives me the ability to have the camera in the same spot, the product in the same spot every single time. So as we change out colors, I don't have to then change and move my camera around. It can all maintain the perfect framing. And then also it gives me the ability to get the different angles that I would need. Obviously, you could only rotate on one axis, generally speaking, with kind of a basic setup. So it's either gonna twirl this way or it's gonna twirl this way, but you're not gonna be able to do these really crazy dynamic moves that you could do with a robotic arm. That's not a problem though, because if I'm gonna be doing slides and crane shots and dolly shots anyway, after the fact, why couldn't I just rotate afterwards? If I turn the product on one axis, but then I can rotate the camera on another, I can then get two sets of rotation while having this other move, in effect getting a simplified version of what the robotic arm could do. I know this is like a lot to take in and it's all in my head, so I'm gonna try to do my best to kind of strip it down and show you how this works, but I needed to explain some of the core concepts first. Now that I had a rough idea of exactly how I was going to make this work, I then needed to do the actual plotting out. We had a hand model that was gonna be interacting with the product, and I knew that we weren't gonna be able to replicate the hand model's movement every time, obviously, because they're a real person and it's not CG, so we're not gonna replicate their movement perfectly. So as I mapped this out, I then had to think of things in terms of start and stops. Let's get resting points that we can have the hand model interact with the product, get the hand out of there, and then make the move, because while I can map out perfectly getting these shots to match with the product, because the product is stationary, I couldn't do the same with the hand model. So this is where kind of pre-production becomes really, really, really important. Now we're only talking about a 10-second ad, so we're not talking about something that requires a lot of shots, and we have 4 colors to work with, so I knew that we were gonna have 1 shot of each and it was gonna come out to that 10-second mark. So I needed to then plot out how each of those shots were going to work. Enter my lovely storyboards. So here I would have kind of starting and stopping points on how I wanted this all to happen. This is actually the storyboards that I used for the shots. And I knew that I needed to have a head-on shot, I needed to have a 45 degrees shot, and then I needed to have a horizontal shot so you could really see how the product functions from a variety of angles. On the back of the product, there's the really cool logo, and I wanted to have that be the part that we then could start our loop over. This is where it starts to get fun, because now I needed to figure out how I was actually going to do this. Local hardware stores are the I mean, honestly, they are the best place ever. At least in my experience and all of the ones that I've been to, it's basically a bunch of dads that like love doing cool stuff. I have showed up many times with an issue that's very bizarre because, of course, as a filmmaker, I need very specific weird things. And so they then will take on this challenge. Shout out to Skip and Brian. You dudes rule. I've even gone in and had them help me build a CO2 powered blood squib. They're so helpful, they know what they're doing, and most of the places, again, that I'm talking about have kind of a workshop in them or in the back where they actually will help me engineer the thing on site. So they're not just giving me a bunch of parts to go home, but they're actually helping me put it together. So this, as you saw, is the product. This is this little coffee espresso maker. I took this little cup into my local hardware store along with this. This should look familiar to anybody who's in filmmaking. This is a 15mm rod, and on the inside it's threaded. And I told the guys that I needed to attach this to the cup so then that way it could spin and rotate. So I needed to figure out a way to mount this to this, and then I needed to figure out a way to mount this into my general rigging. They figured out that the threading is an M12 fine thread. Not entirely sure what that means, but again, this is why I go to them and I don't try to figure it out. So they got this bolt. So they have the bolt fits into the threading like that. And then they drilled a hole. You drop the bolt through the base of this. You screw this onto here, put this guy on here like that, and now problem 1 is solved. I have this little billy club that is the way to mount this. So now this can rotate like this, everything's good and fine. The next thing I needed them to figure out was how to then mount this in a way that it can both be sturdy, stabilized, and still be able to rotate. They concocted this. Again, they had scrap wood in the back in their little wood shop. They just chopped it up together. They nailed it together with just these little wood nails, and they drilled, I could just do this forever. The little hole right into the middle of this, again, perfectly fitting it into this like that. And I have this little situation here, but I need to be able to rotate it, and that's where they then engineered this. This little piece here obviously fits around my 15mm rod, and then this bolt around the side kind of gives me an arm. I can tighten it down like that. You thought I was kidding, I'm doing this all day. So that gives me the ability to put it over the top. We did this for each of the 4 colors, so now I had the way to rotate. I had my pre-production, so I knew where the start and stop points were for each time I had it move, and then what I could do is I could make my motion, hit my end point, then have my hand model interact with the product, and then finish the rotation out. I did that for every single one of the 4 products, and it worked perfectly. This amazing contraption cost me a grand total of $2.74. The only things that I got charged for were the bolts that held this together and this thing. $2.74. Not bad. Of course, relatively speaking, this was the easy part, right? We had the camera on the tripod, we did the 4 things here, we had the hand model. It didn't take us long to shoot this. The magic happens in After Effects, and I'll tell you now, it's not the easiest After Effects tutorial to get this done. It's by no means impossible or super difficult, but if you are uncomfortable with the After Effects UI or you've never used After Effects before, this might be a little bit advanced. I will do my best to walk through exactly how I did it, but just know that now. Now that we have all of our footage shot, the next step is to bring all of that into After Effects. So here you can see I have one of my shots loaded in. In the side corners over here, I have kind of the ends of those C-stand knuckles. And then of course, across the right here, which would be the top, is where I have this rod. What I'm going to do is you can scrub through, you can see kind of where the start to end point is here. So there's the end, here's the start, somewhere in there. I'll create an in point and an out. So now I have kind of exactly where I want this to be. I'm gonna create a new composition, and my composition settings are going to be 9:16, obviously, instead of 16:9. And I'm shooting in 4K. I wanna keep this as a 4K composition for as long as I can. It's 2160 by 3840, and click OK. This gives me my 16:9 comp. From here, I can take this and bring it down into my composition. You'll see it shows up like this. It's still sideways. So the first thing we need to do is we need to rotate this. So we go to transform. In here, you'll see rotation, and I want to go to -90. This now gives me the lovely vertical, which is what I need, obviously, to shoot this the way that I want. It has this odd bit of rotation that's unwanted in here. It starts out good, but then it kind of ends up in a bad place. What I want to do is I want this whole thing to remain perfectly in the center of my frame. And in order to do that, we are going to grab these rulers here on the side. You can hit Command R on Mac. I would imagine it's Control R on a PC. So I'll zoom in here, and I'm just going to set my lines. This just lets me know kind of where the start of each of these pieces are. So there's the top, there's the bottom, one side, and here is the other side of the body, about like that. That's about a pretty good bounding box here. You can see that even in my starting point, it's not level. I have more room on this side than on this side. So again, from my rotation, I can sit here and I can play and adjust this until I'm happy with what would be considered level. From here, I'm going to set keyframes, and of course a keyframe lets me know that at this point in time, this is where it's supposed to be, both in my rotation. I'm also going to set scale and position. I may not change scale and position depending on how this rotation happens, but it is good to let it know this is exactly where I want you to be right here. We'll zoom out a little bit, and then we will scrub forward, and you can see here that where it kind of comes to a halt, we've moved a great deal. So this obviously won't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to again adjust our rotation to get that straight up and down, and we will adjust our position to put it back in the middle. We can now see that from where it starts to where it ends is pretty good. We have a little bit in the middle here where we get a little bit off kilter. Again, you can kind of see it pushes to the side. I'm just going to move this guy back to the middle. Now, when we start and when we end, even though the background shifts and rotates, my product is staying perfectly, which is awesome. That's exactly what we want. We're gonna do that for all of these to make sure that they all behave exactly how they're supposed to behave, and then we'll kind of meet back here.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so now that we have everything all stabilized and straight, that's all good and fine. What we now need to do is we need to mask this guy out, because of course we don't actually want to see these knuckles or this host here. It's pretty simple to do. The only difference is we can't create a layer mask. And the reason we can't create a layer mask is because of course our layer actually moves. And if we create a mask to the layer, it's not gonna give us a clean mask because it's gonna rotate with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a shape layer. We're going to just unselect our layer, go to the rectangle, and create a shape like this. Now we have this shape. It's good. It's not going to move with the layer, but I do need to now adjust this to make it act like a mask. So over here under our track matte options, if you don't see that, you can just go here and this will pull them up with this little icon here in the corner. Our track matte options we have set to none. What we want to do is we want to set this to alpha inverted matte. If we set it to an alpha matte, it's going to treat it like an add on our mask. We want to treat it as a subtract. So alpha inverted mask now is going to get rid of the top and bottom like so. And then when I play it out, you'll see that I don't have to deal with all of that. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a somewhat tighter mask around my actual product, because the background, while it is a solid color, the lighting isn't exactly perfect. So we need to adjust this to make sure that I can create a solid color after the fact and it will look like it's continuous. We're just going to create a loose mask. This mask can be a layer mask. It doesn't have to be a shape mask because it's not going to be that tight. So we don't have to make sure that it's exact in the same way that the other does. So I'm just going to grab my pen tool up here and I'm going to make a loose mask around my object like this. I then will feather that mask. So here under mask, we have mask path and mask feather. I'm going to feather this out because I want that transition to be subtle from this to the background that it's on. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that as this rotates behind, we also move this kind of odd area over here. As it starts to move, I am going to make a keyframe under mask path. And then as this then moves, we get to this final spot here. I'm then just gonna bring these all in. Now you can see that it moves, but it moves far quicker than we need this to. So we'll kind of go about halfway here, again, between our two keyframes. We'll pull this back out. So now we have a nice mask both around this and to get rid of that top element there. We're gonna do this for every single one of these products.
A lot of boring math later.
All right, so I've done that with all of these now, and then now I've added a solid color behind it to continue that out so we get this nice floating infinite look, which is perfect. But for the shots that I have this hand in, we have a problem. You can see here as the hand comes in and interacts with the object, we get this terrible wiggle. What we're gonna do with that is we are going to go to our tracker and we are going to hit stabilize motion. This is then going to open up that exact layer, and we have a couple of options here. Over on the side we have position, but then we also have rotation. If I hit rotation, you'll see that it will create a second tracker. That is going to give us the ability to hit 2 points, so then not only is it going to track along the X and Y axis, but it will also adjust any rotation, which is what we're really seeing, is because as the hand touches it, it's rotating like this because we have the pole coming out of the top. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our final point here right before he touches it. And you can see here, it's stable here and then it moves right there. So this one right before it moves is where we're going to set our track points. I'll zoom in here, and what we're looking for is we're looking for a point of high contrast. It doesn't matter exactly what we're doing, but it needs to have enough of a pattern or enough of a contrast point that it's able to recognize what it's looking at and be able to follow through with that. So here I have this lovely little ridge along the base of my product here. I'm going to set the search field a little bit smaller, and I'm including this hard line here just again to give it a nice piece of contrast. I'm going to do the same thing here with track point 2. I'm going to move it up here across the top. I'm going to find something similar. Okay, so now I have my track point 1, my track point 2. I'm at the right point in time on my layer and I have the appropriate layer selected, and from here I'm going to push the play button. This is the analyze forward button. You're going to then see it's going to go frame to frame, and it's doing a pretty good job finding each of those points. I'm going to go ahead and click apply, and it's going to say, do you want me to adjust both the X and Y? You can do X only or Y only. X and Y is what I want because it's the full movement around the screen, and then I hit OK. As he goes up and touches it, we've eliminated all unwanted wiggle. That's awesome. If you've found that even when you're using your rulers and you're keeping everything inside their appropriate bounding boxes to make sure that they are holding perfectly still through their rotation, if there's other things that happen where you're getting unwanted wiggle, going through and stabilizing that motion for both your position and your rotation is a surefire way to eliminate any of that unwanted wiggle. Next, we're going to create a composition in the final resolution that we want. In this case, it's going to be 1080 by 1920. That again keeps our 16:9 aspect ratio, but is in the final resolution. And I'm gonna drag all 4 of my colors in. So you can see here that this is kind of the final color. It has our solid colors in the background. I've gone ahead and I've added a LUT onto it to give it its final look. And then what I've done is I've gone through and I've lined up in the timing exactly where they're supposed to be. But obviously this looks terrible. So what we want to do is we want to create a 3D camera. That 3D camera is going to be what gives us the ability to rotate, zoom in and out, pull in, do all of those kind of things, which is great. We're going to go over here to layer, new, we're going to go to camera. I generally leave it on the camera that it comes with. I'm usually pretty happy with this. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to create the camera. Now, the camera is notoriously difficult to work with. Generally, what I will do is I will then create another layer, which will be a null layer. So layer, new, and null. A null is much easier to work with, and basically in After Effects what that means is it is a nothing layer. There's no shape, there's no color, there's no object. It just is a layer that I can put parameters on and assign those parameters to other things. The easiest way to do this is you can see here I have camera and then I've got my null. I'm going to grab this whip from camera. I'm going to go up to my null, and you can see here under my parent and link, I have now parented my camera to that null object. This is a 3D camera that works in 3D space, but in order to activate the null to also be able to be controlled that way, we have to toggle on our 3D object. So our 3D layer here is this little box. If I click this, you'll see over here now I have a Y, an X, and then this blue is a Z that I can move my null, also my camera, on. But I need all of these other objects to live in 3D space too, because I need to be able to zoom in and out. So I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to turn on 3D layers for all of my objects. And now that I'm also going to be adding movement into this, I am going to also turn on motion blur. So that's this little guy here, the circle with kind of the cascading shadow here. I will just click and drag those down, turning motion blur on for all of my layers. So then that way, as the camera moves and rotates, it's not going to keep everything perfectly crystal clear, but it's going to add a little bit of motion blur the way that a normal camera would. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to views. Right now it's set to 1 view. I want 2 views. The first view I want to keep as is. This is what the camera is seeing. And then this second view is a top-down shot. So you can see here, I have this flat layer here, which is my null object. But then as I pull the camera back, you can see that it is adjusting my final view. And just like if I go through and I do X, I can move side to side, or I can go to my Y and move up and down. This shows you kind of how I've decided to move the camera in my final composition. We'll walk through this together. As we start, I have this Wakako here on its side. And then as we move forward, it then rotates all the way up and in. It starts here on the side, like so, and then when it gets to the point where it holds perfectly still, I want to zoom out, right? I want to pull away from it, and then I want to rotate it counterclockwise. So we'll go to my end point here where I want this thing to end, and we will go to Z rotation. We'll rotate this back to somewhere in that range to a 0. I will then go to my position and I will pull the camera away from my guy here like so. And you can then see it starts at the beginning and then it pulls back like this right before this hand comes in. This plays out in a really cool way, but it has kind of this really awkward hard stop here at the end. There are a couple of ways that we can deal with this. Easing the motion is the best way. I want to select both of my parameters. In this case, it's the Z rotation and the position. I'm going to right click, go to keyframe assistant, and we are going to ease in. Of course, the hotkey for this is Shift F9. What easing in does is it tells us as we're approaching this point, I want you to kind of slow down as you get to your final destination. And in the same way, I want to do that at the beginning, but I want to, instead of easing in, I want to ease out. So from here, I don't want you to go right out the gate. I want you to ease out of this stop point before we get to the next one. So we're going to ease out from one, ease into the other, and then you can see that this motion has a much more organic, real feel to it. That's what we're going for. That's the magic that we're doing. We have this here. I'm happy with this. We're gonna go out to the end here. And then I really wanna do something weird where I have the camera upside down for this. So as we start this motion here, the second that the hand leaves the device, I'm going to set keyframes here on my position and rotation. I then want to turn this all the way upside down. So then I'm going to again move this over here, going the other way, and I'm going to then make the position, bring it in a little closer. Then we have this where it starts here, flips upside down, and goes like that. That's how we make this work. So I'm gonna show you what this final moves ended up looking like. So here are my final moves, where I start, where I end, and how I have everything move in between. These are all just keyframes here on my null object because my camera is parented to that, but we're able to achieve that cool look using a little bit of masking, adding a solid colored background, and then going through and doing 3D camera motions off of our null object in After Effects. All right, guys, and that's it. I mean, I know we kind of grazed through some of this After Effects stuff. I didn't want to dive too deeply, too heavily into it, but that's the core concepts of what I did to achieve this look. If you liked this, give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, hit subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode. Wow.